The following are true scary stories, found on the subreddit Let's Not Meet. I'll have a link in the description if you would like to read along with me. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe so you can catch all of my future content. Let's begin. I'm a 24-year-old male, and the story took place a few years ago, and still creeps me out. I was taking a walk late at night, probably around 3 a.m., as I couldn't sleep. This happened all the time back then, and I had no reason to get worried. I was just finishing high school. I lived with my parents and younger brother in a very small village in Germany, with a nearby lake and a few small shops. The lights in the streets in our part of town were always kinda dimmed down. You could hardly see anything, or anyone. I'm strolling down the street on a warm night, and I pass a few houses. Everyone has gone to sleep. I don't see a single light. There is no traffic, and not a soul about, or a sound to be heard, except for my footsteps. I was always rather sensitive, and could get scared easily, but like I said, I had nothing to fear, as I took late night walks all the time, without ever having an incident. I'm making my way across the street to enter another street to get to a small park. There's a shop on my right side with a bright light illuminating its entrance, but leaving the parking lot nearby in total darkness. The shop was closed, of course. As I am getting closer to the shop, I notice something strange, without knowing what it was at first. All I can see is that there is something behind the shop. I get closer and realize it's a man standing in front of the glass doors. I'm coming from behind him, so he hasn't noticed me yet. I am now trying to walk as silently as possible to not get him startled. I was a little nervous as well, because I had never seen anyone out at this hour before. Then I get even closer, and my heart stops for a second. The man is completely naked. I still only see him from behind, but I realize from his gray hair and wrinkly skin that he is an older man. My body doesn't know how to respond to this sight, so I just keep walking. That's when he hears me. You might think he would be boggled to notice someone else, but he isn't. He turns around as if he's expecting me, and looks me straight in the eyes, and that's when I notice he has his cock in his hands. He was looking at himself in the reflection of the glass doors, utterly naked, and jerking off. I get shivers, and almost lose my shit just from seeing something so unusual in our small village, or anywhere. I keep walking, and as I do, he just follows me with his eyes, never letting me out of his eyesight. Then he lets go of his cock, and his hands hang down. I can see his face, and there is no expression. I didn't recognize him either. Then I pass the shop, and he's out of sight. I don't know what to make of this encounter, but suddenly I am not fully terrified, and start to think it's somewhat funny. I continue on with my walk, which has me stroll through a park, make a turn, and then go back a slightly different route. I have to mention, though, that I was looking over my shoulders every few seconds, because I was afraid he would be following me. I am still visibly shaken, but for some reason, I decide to go back the way I came, which I normally wouldn't do. Now, as I said, this is a small village, and at this hour, there is no one around and nothing to be heard. So as I come close to the shop again, I start to get scared. I remember the look on his face, and how calmly he turned around to stare at me, like he wanted me to show up. I am almost reaching the shop, and suddenly feel very uneasy, like someone is watching me. I turn to the doors, and he's gone. I don't know what I was expecting to see, but this somehow creeps me out more than having actually him again. I stand still for a second, trying to listen for anything suspicious, slowly turning my head around. I can't see him anywhere. There are a few houses around, so as far as I know, he could have easily gone into one of them, as I didn't know any of the residents there. I noticed that there were no cars in the parking lot, so I started walking again. I am almost breathing normally by this point. Still no sound or sight of the old man, and I'm back to where I have to cross the street, when I feel eyes on me. I stop walking again. I look around and realize I'm standing in complete darkness, out of reach of any street lamp. The parking lot is right next to me, so I slowly turn my head, and I see him. I freeze up and feel my heartbeat. I know he's staring at me, without seeing his face. What I do see is the silhouette of his body, kneeling in the middle of the parking lot in complete darkness, still naked, jerking his cock. He had been waiting for me. In my shock, I made some kind of sound, not more than a small whimper, but he still hears it. He tilts his head, still jerking, and then starts laughing. It's not a loud laugh, more like a chuckle, but knowing we're the only ones out right now, that sound makes me absolutely terrified. I lose my shit and start running immediately, without looking back once. The fact that he had been there still, even after I caught him doing this thing, creeped the hell out of me. I locked every door as I got home, and stood a good half hour at the window, watching out for him. I never saw the old man again, but I still didn't take any walks for a long time, and eventually, I moved out into the city. I grew up in a relatively rural part of England. Once upon a time, the whole area had been ancient woodland, but by the time I grew up there, urban sprawl meant that only a few small pockets of woodland remained, entirely surrounded by housing estates. I hated walking through those woods. The quickest way to get anywhere from the street that I grew up on was to take a footpath that ran from one end of the street, around the back of the houses, and then through maybe a quarter-mile wide patch of woodland before you finally reached the heart of the town. It only took a few minutes if you took the most direct path through, but my heart would be racing the whole time. I had to walk through there to get to school or to the shops when my mom sent me to get groceries, and knowing that, my older brothers would tell me that the woods were haunted by the ghosts of people who had been hung at the gallows that once stood there. But I'm an adult now, so when I visited my mom in her hometown last winter, I no longer feared the woods. It had snowed properly for the first time in a few years, and my mom, in typical mom fashion, immediately informed her elderly neighbor that her daughter was visiting and would happily take her dog for a walk so that she didn't have to risk the icy pavements. The morning after I arrived back there, I found myself walking down that footpath into the woods with a fat, gray around the muzzle, old Labrador in tow. It doesn't often snow in the city I currently live in, so I decided to take a recent purchase, a good DSLR camera, out with me to photograph the scenery. The fat old dog and I wandered around the woods for 20 minutes or so, the dog hobbling a bit in the snow, and occasionally making a half-hearted attempt to chase wood pigeons, while I snapped photographs of the snow-laden branches and the stark black and white landscape. It was quite early on a Sunday morning, so nobody else was around, and there were very few other footprints in the snow. I was quite enjoying the walk, but I started getting cold a bit, and I didn't want to exhaust the neighbor's dog too much, so I was just about to head back, when I heard something moving quickly through the woods towards us. Someone was heading rapidly down the main path. The dog and I were currently out of view on a side path, but only for a few more seconds. I don't really know why it occurred to me to hide, but I did without really thinking about it, I hesitated for a moment, and then, mindful of memories of being accosted by hooded teenagers and robbed of my very first brick-like cell phone, I stepped off of the path and hid among the bushes and trees. The lens on my camera at the time was worth about a month's rent, and I guess I was worried that some opportunistic robber would see it and decide that I was an easy target. The dog hesitated for a moment as I tugged at his lead, but followed me into the bushes just in time. I crouched down with a hand on his head, willing him to be still and quiet, as a person came into view on the path just a few feet away. I didn't really get a good look at him, but I saw that it was a man, tall and wearing a jacket and a red baseball cap, and moving in a hurry. Thankfully, the dog remained quiet, and then the man was gone. When the man was well out of sight, the dog and I stepped back onto the path, and I decided to take a few more pictures before we left. When we were finally heading home, the near silence of the woods was broken by the loud drone of a helicopter overhead. I couldn't see it clearly until we were on the footpath behind the houses and out from under the trees, but once there, I could see that it was a police helicopter, and it was circling over the woods. I returned the fat old dog to my mom's neighbor without any incident, and completely forgot about the helicopter, until a little later when my mom switched the radio on in the kitchen so that we could listen to some music while we ate lunch. It was a local radio station, and their top news story was that the police were hunting a man who had beaten someone nearly to death on a secluded footpath earlier that morning. The path they described linked the woods I had been walking in to the center of town. The suspect was described as tall, wearing a dark jacket, and a red hat. I saw him fleeing the scene of the crime, and it was only my paranoia about my new camera that prevented me from meeting him in the middle of the woods early in the morning with nobody else around. I don't know what would have happened if I would have stayed on the path, but I'm glad I never found out. His victim on the other footpath survived, but it was really close. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe so you can catch all of my future content. Sometime within the next few days, I will be setting up another Facebook, but it won't be a private one, so I'll leave a link when I get it. But as for now, just keep an eye out. And remember, it's always scarier if it's true.